I started out with humble roots. My family actually was dairy farmers. I felt like I wasn't enough, and that kind of mantra of family-owned business in the small town, nothing's going to happen unless we make it happen, is like, you really do learn to work. For a lot of us in like Western cultures or first world countries, we're so comfortable that we have to go out and like make ourselves be uncomfortable. A lot of people come into investing thinking that they're going to solve an income problem. They'll say something like, how much income can I expect if I invest X amount? And so they're thinking, hey, dividends, like I can get paid every month or paid every quarter. That's really cool. But thinking that investing $1,000 or $3,000 into dividend stocks is going to solve your income problem is probably not totally well rooted. I'm not here to argue this way is better or that way is better. Like, if you think dividends are cool and they get your heart racing in the morning, by all means, do dividends. If you think they're terrible and you're gonna do the growth stocks, like, that's fine. Until you're in the arena, you have no clue. It's just fun to see that snowball happen too, where you're like, I was getting $5 a month and now I'm getting $100 a month or $200 a month, and that's real money. You could go out to dinner, you could like roll that into another ETF and buy a bunch more. So in the long term, I'm still not going to be as good as something like an S&P 500 index fund. Yeah, I just invested more and more, and my wife and I got together and we invest more and more, and so yeah, we're on our path to retire early now.
Investors, welcome back to another go-round of Masters of the Market. Here with me today is Brandon Evan, who is on the financial freedom journey, and he's here to talk all about his path, what his journey's been like thus far. But I'm going to let him go ahead and introduce himself because he can do it much better than I can. So Brandon, welcome to Masters of the Market. I want to go ahead and pitch the first question over to you. What exactly is your story, and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks, Ari. I started out with humble roots. My family actually was dairy farmers for 99 years. So we had dairy cattle on a farm with like 200 acres. And, it sounds like a big plot of land, but like in the actual industry, that's a very small, tiny farm. 500 cows you're milking is like tiny compared to what you like need to survive well. So grew up in a very like rural area, open spaces, lots of time alone and with animals, and very like kind of country western feel. And it's not that I have any problem with that. It's just, for me, like my style was so different. And so a lot of like the themes of my life have been like, what's the popular thing and how do I do like the opposite of that? I grew up in this like analog world, and I was fascinated with like digital stuff. So, millennial, but early adopter into like video games and that kind of thing. And like my family's going, what is this about? Like, this isn't what we want to do. This isn't cool. But the good thing about that kind of like area growing up, and that kind of mantra of the family-owned business in the small town, nothing's going to happen unless we make it happen, is like, you really do learn to work, and you learn to kind of like tough out difficult circumstances. And so we have like lots of stories that we'll share of like, this was the worst summer job ever, when we're like sweating to death. Like, part of what you would do out here, at least, is whenever you're storing food for a cow, you pile up this mountain of it. I mean, it's like literally 30 feet tall in kind of like a big hump on the ground, and you cover it with this thick plastic and throw tires on top to hold it down. So imagine it's 110 degrees in Arizona. You're out there just getting baked. The plastic is white, so it's reflective and just burning you. And then the tires are full of like year-old water and scorpions. And so you like throw an old tire, it's cutting up your arms. You're dehydrated, there's scorpions around, you get splashed with this old water. Like, it's a terrible, summer job situation, but like the work needs to get done. And then in the meantime, now for the rest of your life, you're like, I've done worse jobs than this. I can probably handle whatever this job is, because it's not that old job. There's no scorpions. I'm not like getting destroyed by some old tractor tire. So it's a fun upbringing. I still have like family who kind of lives that lifestyle. But for me, I was like, let's go towards like a desk job. Could I work at a desk all day and get paid to be indoors? Like, that's so crazy to me. This concept is so wild. So I went to school, got a degree in construction management, graduated in 2009 when the economy crashed. And so no one had a job, floundered for a while, did a bunch of different jobs, was a security guard for like 3 days, had to kind of like report my coworker to the boss, because I was like, he's doing illegal stuff. Also, I don't want to work here, so see you guys later. Had a short stint in sales, like kind of did my dues everywhere. Did some time in retail. And then I was like, I should get back into construction, because that's like a real career. But even before then, I was fortunate that my parents always had this kind of mindset of like, let's not live beyond our means, which I didn't really get until I was older. I was like, what does that mean? It's like these phrases people quote, and it's like, what the heck does that? And thankfully, it sunk in despite not really getting it, which was like, let's not go into a bunch of debt. Let's not try and live a fancy lifestyle. Let's just be who we are. We're like humble farmers who do our thing and we appreciate quality time. And it's not about fancy objects and, flashy trips and stuff like that. And so it's one of those things where I think you learn the best by watching the people around you and like ingesting, the ethos of your lifestyle. So that kind of helped me out going in that direction. They gave me a little bit of literature growing up about finances and stuff. And I just remember like as a kid, even I would sit there and, count my few dollars and plan something out. Like I was going to buy a cool toy or whatever, but always had a problem with impulse control. You go to the store and you've got like your $5, you got to buy whatever the first toy is that you see. Oh my gosh, I have to have this one. But what that meant overall was like, I kind of had that mindset. I was on the lookout for what's a smart within your means kind of financial decision going into life, trying to get this first real job. How do I take advantage of it? Oh, they have a 401k. Okay, let's get started with this 401k. At a few of those previous jobs before construction, I'm like, let's jump in this 401k thing. Okay, let's roll it over into an IRA. Let's try and build some kind of nest egg here, some kind of wealth. And in my early 20s, when I've like frivolously spent most of the money I've made, now this was like a big switch to go towards this adulting direction, this non-frivolous direction. And since then, I've just kind of geeked out more and more. Got into making videos and things on YouTube to try and share what I learned with people, because I noticed that people don't talk about money a whole lot in everyday life. So like, let's find a spot to talk about money more. And I'm sure we'll get into that more, but yeah, I just invested more and more. And my wife and I got together and we invest more and more. And so, yeah, we're on our path to retire early now.
I want to actually start where you just ended, which is why people aren't talking about finances as much. And I got a whole heap of questions for you, to follow up on that, because you said so much. But I want to start there because it's the reality. There's not a lot of people talking finances and money, and especially, with a belief or an actual mindset that this whole financial freedom journey can be done and can be done successfully. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a touchy subject for people because it's been, I think it's been a pain point for a lot of people in one way or another. Maybe they were less fortunate than I was to have parents that were really terrible with money, and that became this point of friction in their life. And maybe they experienced divorce or conflict or, just fighting all the time or whatever that was kind of around money. I think as people, we remember our pain more than we remember our like victory. And so whenever we have pain with money, that sticks with us. And then it's also like, it's such a social metric too, that like, what's the value you add to the marketplace? If that guy adds more value than me, maybe I'm a little ashamed because I feel like, I'm trying hard, but that guy makes 10 times the money I make. Well, that sucks for me. And so it's a whole mixed bag of emotions for us. I think there's pain and shame and comparison and all that stuff in there. And then there's also like the weird familial like anecdotes where people are like, well, you shouldn't invest in the stock market. It's very risky. So-and-so, Uncle Bob over here, he lost his shirt in the stock market. So we have now learned because he did that, we never invest in the stock market. And it's like, how does that become the wisdom that gets passed around, just in passing or in family meetings or whatever? But like that kind of stuff happens. And so I had some of that to overcome as I was learning and growing. And I'm like, that doesn't seem right. Why is that the one story we have about what it means to invest or save or whatever that is? I think there's a lot of unlearning that has to happen too. And that's a tricky thing. And everyone's on a different page. And so, yeah, it's a real mixed bag. There's also very strong opinions around money. So you've got like very opinionated people, right or wrong, pain points, comparison games, all that stuff. And so it becomes a tricky subject. But, I think we don't have to necessarily reveal everything to have a conversation about money. We could talk to people about it and maybe don't have to mention values, but say, hey, are you happy at your job? Or are you able to save and invest right now? Or something like that. Not to come from a point of like, I'm doing this and you're not, but I think it could be healthy for us to normalize those kind of conversations and just say, are you stressed about money right now? Is there anything going on? If you've got a close friend or a coworker or something, that's kind of how we started with it at work. Well, before I quit that job, was like someone mentioned their retirement or something. And it was like, yeah, let's talk about it. What are you thinking about? Oh, I'm worried because I'm getting older. I might have to change how I'm investing to be more conservative. Oh yeah, sometimes people do that. but you'll make less of a return. But people do that sometimes. Yeah, if you want to do that, you totally could. Oh, and I'm worried about this, and I don't know how taxes work. And we just slowly got into a conversation just based on what they were thinking, and they were vulnerable enough to share with the table. But I think we can slowly dip our toe in the water in the right ways. It's not like that person revealed to me and said, I have 100,000 invested, or I have a million, or whatever the thing was. I don't think we have to get naked in front of each other, but at the same time, we can, take a step in that direction, make sure that person is safe and trustworthy. If it gets weird, then we can back away and find somebody else. But I think we would generally benefit more if we talked about it.
Let me ask you this on a personal front. How has opening up about your finances actually helped you and propelled you towards success?
So the first way is more interpersonal, because it's almost like once you start sharing, other people understand that it's safe for them to share. And that goes beyond money, but in money in particular, if you start talking about it, people go, oh, okay, this is now all right. This is a space where at least I can share as much as he shared, maybe. And then you can keep going from there if you want to. And so socially and with family and friends and stuff like that, it's become the norm. Like for me, when it wasn't, growing up, now it's absolutely the norm, where people will just like walk up to me at an event and be like, hey, Brendan. And then they just like go dive into the investing rabbit hole. And I'm like, this is great. I love it. But this was so not common until, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So I think socially there's a benefit because you do get to start that conversation. And then for me, like personally, because there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of rules, it's challenging too to say, I'm going to talk about this thing. And if I'm going to talk about it, I probably should know what I'm talking about to a degree. Like I'm by no means an expert. Probably I'm less of an expert than most people you have on this series. And I'm open to put that out there. But at the same time, anytime you're trying to describe something to someone else, you're challenged to know it better. It's like that teacher phenomenon. So that's been a fun thing too, that someone else will ask you a question and you'll go, you know what? I didn't think about asking that question. Like my wife will do that all the time. Hey, what about this? Oh, I should have thought about that. That's a great question to ask. So just that kind of like challenge of another person bouncing ideas off of you, I think helps you to learn and grow quite a bit yourself. And I love it.
Now you had, very humble beginnings. It sounds like working on the farm, long hours throughout the day. And I want to ask you if you think that humble beginnings are necessary for someone to truly be on a financial freedom journey and understand the left and right turns of this journey and where to cut and how to save. Does
Yeah.
everyone need to come from such humble beginnings?
I mean, I'm sure it's possible not to, but I think it helps. I think it helps to have a place that you remember, maybe where you don't want to go back to. Hopefully there's not too much pain there, but you hear about people that have experienced homelessness or other real deep struggles in their family, and they're like, we're not going back to that. Like whatever it takes, we're not doing that. And so I think there's a fire in you that can grow from a humble beginning. But more than anything, I think it's a matter of appreciating a thing that you have earned, that I think is a critical factor, if I had to guess. I mean, I'm not an expert in this. I haven't studied it. But like, for example, whenever you look at what are real studies of affluent parents, like let's say generation one didn't have a lot of money. Generation two comes along. They're very motivated. They're like, I don't want to go back there. That was rough. Maybe they start a business, they make a lot of money, they do something to become very financially successful. Then what's common is their children then lose the money. That's like the pattern. Someone has a hard start, they make it, their kids lose it. And it's funny because you go, well, shouldn't they be more set up? Like they just watched their parents do it. They had a teacher living with them their whole life. It's like a little bit of a pressure that I feel like I better teach my kids, because if I'm the one claiming that I'm doing this thing and I'm into it, I better teach them. But somehow that ball gets dropped. And so my guess is that critical factor that makes that turn happen is really the challenge of having to go out on your own. This is mine. I don't really have another option. I've got to make this happen for myself, and not having a bunch of safety nets and mom and dad's money and their financial backing behind you, and that kind of like luxury and that kind of sloth like attitude you can have. I think that kills it for people. And it's also like maybe a sense of entitlement that can come with that. We can get pretty sour on like the silver spoon kids pretty quick. But I think from what I've seen, whenever a successful parent creates enough opportunity for the kid to go out and make their own thing happen and actually let them fail, if that is what's going to happen, then that kid stands to succeed. So it's almost like what I think about whenever I think about running, and how for a lot of us in like Western cultures or first world countries, we're so comfortable that we have to go out and like make ourselves be uncomfortable. Oh, I'm going to fast for 14 hours a day. Then I'm going to go on a 5 mile run and I'm going to put myself through this pain for what? Like, I'm not trying to survive. I'm not trying to catch an animal to eat tonight, but we have to artificially impose that challenge on ourselves. So I almost think of it like that, where, okay, let's say you're coming from a great starting point. You might have to artificially impose a challenge and just pretend like your parents won't help you. There's no way anybody's going to help me. I've got to make this happen. That's probably not true. But if you make it true in your mind, I think your odds of success are better. So it's kind of a silly thing to think about, but I'm guessing that would actually help us.
You know, it's interesting you actually say that because as you were sharing that, I was thinking to myself, like, I know that if I absolutely needed help, my family would be there for me. But I think for such a long time, it's just been ingrained in me. It's like I will not rely on anybody. And that
Yeah.
has been such a big motivator because it's like if other people can make it and in worse off positions than I am, I should really put my foot to the metal here and push down and go. What I love that you said, have a moment that I'm not going back to this moment that you can maybe write down and keep with you to help drive you. Brandon, what was your moment in which you said I'm not going back to this? Was it the farming?
Yeah, I think the farming was part of it. And I like being uncomfortable. Like, I like a challenge. I like a physical tear me apart kind of situation, but I also like choosing it. I like being the one in control and saying, I'm going to turn this up or down and be ready for it and that kind of thing. So part of it was the farming and the struggle. That's also a strange industry because, like, where we are, the government sets the price of your goods. So it'd be like if you opened a store selling plants, like the plant behind you, and the government was like, all right, Ari, you can sell that for $11 today. You're like, it cost me $12. It sucks to suck. You're going downhill today. It's like, it's such a crazy industry. So that lack of control and that level of like stress to have your own business, I was like very turned off by that kind of idea. And so the dream was, yeah, desk job salary. Can I have some stability, predictability, set hours? Can I have these kind of limitations set up with work so that then I can operate freely outside of those limitations whenever I'm not working?
Sure.
And so that was kind of part of it. And I think there's a healthy and unhealthy balance of that potentially too, because like if it's not too much to share, in high school, I felt like I wasn't enough of just a attractive person, like literally attractive, but just in general, like I'm not bringing enough to the table to have worth amongst my peers and the people around me. And so that chip on my shoulder was then highly motivating for a few years there of like, I'll show them,
Mm.
let me put my nose to the grindstone and work super hard and lift weights and work hard and be this overachiever person to prove my worth. And that's a fire in the belly situation that's useful, but I don't think it's also the most healthy thing you can do as a person. So I think there's some managing of that you can do that says I need to maintain a healthy like lifestyle, mental health, physical, emotional health, and hopefully I can be motivated too. So I'm still kind of working on that. So that was escaping the farm and the kind of agricultural lifestyle was part of it. Dreams for more was another like aspirational motivator for me to say, well, if I'm here, I'm buying into this lifestyle, but I'm not able to literally buy any kind of lifestyle. I can't go buy like a cool Porsche or do something awesome because I'll never be able to afford that. So the headroom is higher elsewhere also. And then more recently, whenever I quit my job in construction, you can't see the whiteboard behind me here, but behind this sound curtain is a whiteboard. And I had initially like written down things that were motivating, like goals, like I can do this and whatever, and positive things. And I erased all that and I wrote the things about the old job that I didn't like, that I don't want to go back to. So now I'm motivated by those things too, like driven by those negative things to not go back to the stressful situations and the conversations I didn't like having and stuff like that. So hopefully it's a positive motivator in a way that keeps me healthy and driven, but not too negative and dragging me down.
Let's get a little bit into this investment talk here for everybody.
Yeah.
How exactly did you start? What was your process like in the beginning, and how have you evolved to where you are now today?
Yeah, I think my first start, I believe, was at a Target store, like a Target retail store. So I was a guest services team leader there. And pretty early on, you get access to their 401k. And so I was like, I don't know what this thing is. Like, I can picture myself in the little computer room where they had their 4 computers set up. It was like a long, skinny closet. And I was at the first computer and I was setting up this 401k. I'm like, I don't know what this is, but those are letters and numbers, and people invest here, and I'm going to do this thing. And thankfully, they kind of like guardrailed you in. So you had a few things to pick from. Like you had to pick from this fund or that fund or whatever. It wasn't like the entire stock market. It was elect a percentage to contribute and go. And I had just been exposed enough to financial concepts and Dave Ramsey and whoever else to be like, this is something worth doing because if I do this, they had a 401k match. And so I'm like, I'm not dumb enough to turn down free money. I'm pretty dumb and I'll waste the money I do get. But if you're going to give me free money, like I will take that. So that was my first foray in that direction. I think I started with whatever the minimum was to get the free money. It was like 3%. So you're making 15 bucks an hour and 3% feels like too much to not have. But at the same time, you're like, I'm getting free money out of this. So I've got to do it. I've got to take the bonus in a way. And so then that became a little bit of a game for me. You know, I liked video games as a kid and I like numbers and charts and things like that, but I'm by no means, you know, on the level of these Excel wizards and numerical savants. But it was fun to then come back a month later and log in and you're like, hey, the numbers went up. This is so cool. I like seeing the numbers go up. Like that means something someday. And so slowly that snowballed a little bit more and more. And when I left Target, I rolled that over. And then I had kind of a misstep investing. And I did what I think a lot of us do, which is you're unsure about this new arena. For a lot of us, it's investing, but it could be insurance sales or a realtor or whoever. And instead of like vetting the professionals out there or doing research or learning anything, you just go, do I know someone who does that thing? Oh, yeah. I went to college with a guy who does that thing. I should invest with that guy. That would be so easy. And I can trust him because I knew him from 5 years ago. And it's like, that's really a terrible vetting process. Imagine if you went to a doctor or something that way and you're like, hey, I know that that guy is a doctor. He must be the best because I know him. Like the proximity doesn't, you know, equal excellence. And so he talked me into, which I didn't know any better, this kind of investment that had very high fees. And I think it was, I don't know if it was a taxable brokerage account or if that was the IRA I'd rolled over the 401k into or what I had done. It basically never set well with me that even though I liked this guy, I mostly trusted him. It was like, why are these fees so high? And so eventually I did more and more research on it. And we live in the age of information. So thankfully we have so many resources at our fingertips and we can always Google something or read a book or whatever. 100 years ago, you're on your own. But I kept looking into it and I went, these fees are exorbitantly high. And so I broke it off with him, I think within a year or two. And then I started kind of self-managing a little bit more. And I went, okay, if this guy isn't actually going to add that much value, and for not adding value, he's going to charge me huge fees, this doesn't add up. Like there's got to be a way here to not misstep too badly on my own and thereby go around all these huge fees. And so that was kind of the first few years there was, gosh, what year was that now? 2010 or 11. And it was probably 2012 or so whenever I was investing with that guy. So that was the first couple years.
Sure. And from there, what was your next step? You stop
From
investing with
there,
him and you just,
yeah,
was it ETFs? Was it indexes? Was it individual
I
stocks right off the
think
bat?
it was definitely not individual stocks. I've never been a big individual stock guy, largely trusting the wisdom of people that have been around longer than me and done more research than me to study the average person doing our best, trying our hardest, and still just falling on our face whenever we pick individual stocks because we're just not sophisticated enough or intelligent enough or able to compete in the marketplace in the way that maybe you could 40 years ago. So it was always kind of indexes and ETFs for me. I don't even know if I knew what an ETF was back then. It was probably all indexes. And I think I moved everything over to Vanguard because they had low fees. You know, I'm on this low fee kick. Like, how can I lower the fees as much as possible? It's like lowering your calories when you're on a diet. You're like reading different labels. Oh, this number is smaller. That must be good. Okay, we'll do that. It tastes terrible. And just kept doing that. And then I had another 401k at the next job. So I invested in that for a little while, got out of there, rolled that one over. And so I was kind of in this start a 401k, roll it over kind of kick and bring it into an IRA. And then I finally got into the construction job. So this was April 2014. I got into this construction job and wanted to do the same thing again. But then I had to learn the painful learning experience of vesting periods and, well, and waiting to get access to your 401k also. So for that company, it was wait a year, be employed full-time for a year, then you get access to the 401k. And then once you contribute, it's a 3-year vesting period too. No, 5-year vesting period. So you get 20% of your employer match every year as you rolled along. You have to wait a full 5 years before you got the full match. And I was like, okay, A, this sucks because I had this plan to keep investing. I'd slowly been investing, you know, some throughout all this time, 2010 to 2014. But now they basically slammed the door on me and said, sorry, you can't use our 401k. And I was like, this was my vehicle up until now. That was kind of my place. And so now I've got to go out and really find my own avenue of what kind of account do I use? And it forced me to go and learn that on my own. And I'm thankful for that because I didn't have somebody else to bounce the idea off of. I had to just go down that rabbit hole myself and read and learn and listen and do all the podcasts and all the books and all the websites to try and figure that out and go, what difference does it make if you use a taxable account versus a traditional IRA versus a Roth IRA? Then a year from now, when I get that 401k access, what do I do there? And so that struggle and that like slammed door ended up being an opening to other avenues where I went, okay, I can keep going. I can still invest without that one vehicle I was comfortable with, find some other stuff that works for me, open another IRA or do whatever I want to do and keep going that way. And at that same time, my wife and I got married. And so she had a 401k that she had access to right away. So I was like, I still remember this too. I remember sitting on her bed in her apartment at the time. Look, let's grab your laptop. You have a 401k? Let's set it up right now. And she was like, okay, I mean, whatever. I was like, we're not going to dinner yet. We're setting up the 401k. Stop everything. So we sat there and set it all up and did everything and pushed okay. And she's like, that's it. Yeah, that's it. We did the thing. I was like ready to celebrate. And she's like, okay. That didn't feel like anything to me, but we did the thing. So it was a fun kind of learning experience to try and figure out how do we take accountability for ourselves. Up until that point, you kind of lean on the employer, you lean on their options, you lean on them. And that's like what you do as a kid too, growing up, you lean on the people around you. And I think that was kind of a formative moment to go, there's nobody to lean on. We got to figure this out. I'm not going to ask for help. Well, logically, if I had someone to ask for help, I would have, but I don't have anybody around me that knows this. So I've got to go figure this out. And so we together kind of said, let's handle our finances in the way that we want to, find the avenues we want to. And then she had not that many options either as far as what she's investing in. Her account is with Fidelity, but their employer says you've got these like 20 funds to pick from. Pick one. And they're basically all target date funds. So she jumped into that and she's been there ever since. And then when I did get access to the 401k, then I jumped into whatever, long-term, very diverse index fund they had too. It's kind of like a target date fund and did that for as long as I could, 9 years. And then we're getting closer to where we are today.
Let's talk a little bit about where you are today. How's that portfolio built now? As you went from indexes or the target date funds and take two, now we are where we are. Did you add individual stocks? Are you still just ETFs and indexes? And what's the split there between perhaps the growth orientation and more dividends? Because by the way, if no one out there has seen Brandon's channel, you got to jump over there after this chat. A lot of information on everything across the board within the financial space. Where are we today in your portfolio?
Thanks for the plug. And today we're still very heavily into ETFs and indexes because I still basically trust that in the long term, regardless of whatever I'm learning and finding out and attempting to do as far as predicting the future, I'm still not going to be as good as something like an S&P 500 index fund. And so I would say probably 90% plus of everything that we have invested in all the portfolio is oriented towards growth. So a lot of blue chip, just give me the big company that's pushing for growth, not necessarily focused on dividends or value or anything in particular. It's like, give us all the growth because we're just going to hang on for another 10, 20 years or so. And it served us well so far. Obviously, there's a lot of opinions out there about what could happen in the future and what changes could happen that would shift around your investment strategy. But I think we're still comfortable doing that, about 90% into growth. And then more recently, I've dipped my toe in the water of like, what does it look like to do something else? Partially because it's just really boring to do the same thing for a long time. And that's kind of the investing playbook for most of us is put your head down and do the same thing for a long time. And maybe it's not even that long if you do it hard enough, and then you'll be able to retire. But I also thought, like, what's the deal with this dividend thing? And so about 14 months ago, I said, let's start a dividend portfolio. I'll get $700 into Robinhood. We'll buy some dividend stocks or ETFs or something. I don't know. And we'll just start this. And I'll do a little like video series on it. And so that was kind of a fun, like push off of the ledge of having to learn a little bit more about dividends. You fall for some dividend yield traps here and there. You jump into some big name stuff because you hear the name thrown out there and it sounds like a good idea, and you read a little bit of the prospectus and you're like, sure, yeah, I see why that's popular. You really don't. I don't know. You don't see anything, but you jump into it anyway. And it's just a lot more entertaining for one thing, because you're like, even if the performance is the same or even a bit less than the growth portfolio, this is just so much more fun. Like it's involving, you're doing something. I like burritos and race cars. I say on my channel a lot. And I'm like, it's almost the difference between like driving a manual transmission that requires your attention all the time versus driving like an electric car, which you're like, it's very cool, it's very chill, but you're just not required to be there even. It's going to do its thing basically on its own. Where like an older car with a manual, like you've got to be awake and alert and doing stuff. Not that a dividend portfolio makes you do that much. It's just, it's inviting you to participate a little bit more. Hey, cool. Got a dividend today. Great. That's so exciting. So I like that side of it. And then a few individual stocks have come along with that too, largely for the dividend portfolio. Just because I feel like that's the thing that I'm willing to see fluctuate a lot more, and also share that journey. That's part of like the openness with money. Like, hey, I'll just show you the portfolio. Let's just talk about it every month. We'll go through and show every movement, every purchase, every sale, just to go, I made some mistakes. Let's talk about those mistakes, because maybe if I can share that, then maybe you won't have to do the same thing. Maybe you won't fall for that yield trap or whatever the thing is. So we're still oriented in that direction. My wife has still got access to her 401k, and so we're just shoveling money into hers the way that we always have. And I've got a lot of different spreadsheets and a lot of different tools to try and forecast this out. But if we kind of hold constant the way we are, we have good odds of retiring at, 50 or so. So like another 12, 13 years, which still feels old. I don't know. It's like whenever you're 15, 30 feels old. Whenever you're 30, 50 feels old.
So he's another
like,
decade out.
Yeah, like push it out at a decade and a half. Those are the old people, not me. But that's still like, much earlier than average. I mean, I think the average is getting into the mid 60s now. So 15 years early is still pretty darn early. And if we play our cards right and work hard and can be content with less, it could be a lot sooner than that too. So it's exciting.
I gotta say, at least you're not still on the farm. That was goal number one. Get off the farm.
Yes.
Brandon,
Not
where
out
are
there
you now?
covered in manure.
Yeah, right. Where are you now portfolio value wise today in total? I don't know. It sounds like you got a couple different portfolios. We're gonna dive into the dividend portfolio in just a hot second. But total value wise right now, whereabout are you? And you can ballpark it.
Well, my wife and I have decided not to share total value. So I'd say over 500,000, but under $1 million liquid would be the range.
And
So
then dividend portfolio wise, I saw it was 2 weeks old of a video. 31,000, something around there.
Yeah, something around there for the dividend portfolio, and some other money that, I've got a bunch of different accounts, partially because of YouTube. I'm like, I've got to have an account here to show people what it looks like to use this service. And so that makes taxes a pain at the end of the year, but I'd rather be able to show you firsthand and speak from experience. And so I had other accounts, a taxable here and a taxable there. And I'm like, why do I fiddle faddle around with these small amounts in these places I don't really like, when I could just have a bigger dividend portfolio? And that's a lot more exciting. And so slowly been transferring more and more money over there. And then it's just fun to see that snowball happen too, where you're like, I was getting $5 a month and now I'm getting $100 a month or $200 a month. And that's real money. You could go out to dinner. You could like roll that into another ETF and buy a bunch more. So that's pretty exciting, even though it's still relatively small in the term of a dividend portfolio you could like live off of or retire to Thailand off of. But it's exciting to see it grow.
Sure. That was one of the, I guess I'll say, enticements that got me hooked on dividend investing, was really just the ability to watch that dividend snowball. But you also mentioned that when you started dividend investing, you started to get or experience a lot of the errors that could be made. And I'm curious to know, when you started dividend investing, what were some of those mistakes that you actually made, and now looking back, you'd advise otherwise?
Just a bunch of funny, kind of beginner things where I think my background up to this point was like, you've got to be very diversified. And so I picked some dividend paying ETFs and things like that I thought, okay, this is the safe choice that's very diversified. It's probably not going to fluctuate a crazy amount because it's 150 companies or whatever. And the dividend yield seems okay. But I was pretty much looking at the dividend yield as an indicator of whether or not to buy it. Is it popular or not? Is it well diversified or not? Okay, sure. Let's go in that direction. Let's kind of just follow the herd of sheep. Let's be another sheep. And then weirdly, I was like, what I also should do is pick some individual stocks. As if I wasn't diversified enough in these ETFs with maybe hundreds of companies. I'm like, I need to pick 6 more on my own. My brilliant big brain idea here. So it's just kind of a funny like line of thinking where you go, is 3% more diversification going to help or hurt anything? No, it doesn't even make a difference. And you're talking about whatever it was at the time, $100 or $200 individual stocks, but you justify your decision making process, I think, sometimes, and you don't zoom out and see that it was kind of silly. I probably could have just gotten by with like 2 ETFs, and then
Sure.
there's the portfolio. But I think I just wanted to have more at bats and have more chances. But then part of that problem is then you go, well, if I can just opt into a higher yield, well, then I'll pick that stock, because this shoddy old ETF over here, it only pays me 4%, where this stock is saying it's going to pay me 17%. Well, I'll do a quick math on that and think I'm going to get a great yield. And so drop whatever it is, $80 or $100 into that, not realizing it's, medical properties trust or something else, that they're having severe financial issues right now. That's why the yield calculation on the app looks really high, is because their numbers are so wonky that it's pushing that yield up. But the odds of them being able to pay the yield are not very good. They're in a dire financial strait, not going out of business. But right now, if they were somehow able to pull it out, yeah, the yield would be high. But the odds are it's not actually a wise decision. So there's a lot of those kinds of yield traps, or those things that seem really appealing on the surface, that if you knew more of the background, you'd go, oh, the stock's gone down by 85% in the last 2 years. That's probably not good. Their ability to pay out this dividend is like somehow above 100%, their dividend payout ratio. And so things like that, I guess I didn't learn that much through the pain of that. I was going to say you could learn through the pain of that, but I mostly was like, this doesn't feel right. And I've tried to kind of trust that gut feeling to go, this doesn't feel quite right to invest with a guy that had really high fees. It doesn't feel quite right to like somehow expect this failing company to pay me a dividend. They need to pay themselves a dividend. They got to keep the lights on. This isn't going to happen. And so, again, forced to kind of do a little bit more research and go, what's really happening here? Oh, this isn't good. Well,
Sure.
maybe we need to do something different. And so I trust the pain to be a teacher, unfortunately.
Oftentimes I hear it's the best teacher.
I think it is, realistically. There's someone out there, someone's watching this and they're like, nope, I avoid the pain. I learn from other people's pain like you dummies, and I will go right around it and I will keep going. And it's like, hey man, if you can do that, more power to you. I'm glad that you can do that, but I've got to like hit a wall first and then realize, oh, there's a wall here. We should go around this. That's a problem.
Brandon, what's the portfolio breakdown for you in that dividend portfolio? If you could name the top, positions you have in there, if you still have individual stocks in there, which ones are they? Or are you
Yeah.
solely just focused now on the ETFs again?
I still do have some. I could even pull it up, and I need to make another video here at the end of May, so you can get the most up-to-date portfolio then. I mean, I think the realization was I need to be more ETF focused. And so whenever I transferred over some money from another brokerage to here, I was like, let's just go far, far deeper into the ETF world. And so the vast majority of shares are, in the JEPI, SCHD, SPHD, SPYD, that kind of family of the usual suspects. And then there's a few spread out elsewhere. For some reason, I had like accidentally and inadvertently gotten into a ton of individual real estate based companies, whether they're real estate finance or they actually hold physical real estate, or somehow they're in that realm of real estate. And it's not been the best industry to be investing in the last like 2 or 3 years. Coming out of the pandemic, it's been kind of rough roads for a lot of people. So I didn't even realize I was doing that until I was sharing with people what the portfolio was. And I was like, oh, this is probably a little overemphasized. So I recently sold some of those positions and tried to get more, again, diverse across industries and sectors to go, maybe if real estate tanks, I'm going to tank. So let's just spread our legs out a little wider here so that doesn't happen.
Sure.
But yeah, still, I'm probably 85% across those 4 ETFs. And then everything else is smaller amounts elsewhere.
Talk a little bit about your process and how you come to picking ETFs, or how you came to picking those individual stocks, because process is huge for a lot of us. And most people right off the bat have the process of, oh, XYZ said this, so I'm going to do that. They get a quick learning lesson. Hopefully that process for them starts to develop. And it sounds like you
Yeah.
had a lot of time to experiment and experience with different processes. So what's it like for you today?
Oh, it's still a flawed process. I still wouldn't recommend anyone do what I do. It's still a mess. I've just slowly learned a few more things to look out for. If anything, I'm trying to avoid some of those pitfalls. And so let's look out for a dividend yield trap, and let's try and look for some more positive indicators of a company's health, their ability to pay out, their reputation of paying things out, Not that there's any guarantees. It's ridiculous to plan on this happening perfectly for forever, but we can at least weigh our odds in a direction or another direction. And so I had become an affiliate of this company, Seeking Alpha. They're kind of a big research company in the investing space. And they were like, hey, if you want to, if somebody clicks on your link, you'll get a little kickback from us. Okay, great, whatever. But the perk of that I didn't expect to get was access to the platform. And I was like, I don't see how I could ever use this. And then one day I picked it up and I was like, let me just see what this dividend info says about this company, because I thought about making a move. I was like, this is actually pretty useful because you can learn what these numbers mean, and to a degree, and then you can use that to go, hey, maybe this company isn't in as healthy of a financial situation as that company, or maybe they're brand new. This ETF that I thought about getting into has actually only been around for 16 months, even though it looks really attractive on paper. They haven't actually had a long time to prove themselves. So do I want to opt into that level of risk and be kind of an early adopter, or do I want to go with something a little bit more tried and true and proven? And so it's not like they've got some magic service or that logic is so good, but it's like somehow just becoming a bit more aware of the potentials here. And what does it actually look like for these companies to be able to still pay their dividend, or this fund to be able to maintain what they've maintained up to this point? If 60% of their revenue comes from this hospital over here that's like going out of business, that's not good for us as the investor. So either plan for it, do what you want to do with that information, but we have the information. So it's slowly accumulating a bit more of those skills. And then I have over here on the shelf behind me, you probably can't see, I have like 3 other dividend related books that I was like, let me get a little deeper into this too and go beyond what I can peruse on the internet in 30 minutes and look at someone's whole thought process. And so I'm partway through one of the books, but I plan on making reviews of the books and kind of sharing what I learned from those things too, and just trying to slowly accumulate skills over time. It's still not been that long. I mean, 14 months to be doing this, or whatever it's been, 15 months. It still feels like a blink of an eye to me. So it'd probably be another 9 or 10 years before I really am like, okay, I have an idea of what's happening here. Not that I'm the person to follow or that I know what I'm doing necessarily, but I'll be better at making decisions then than I am even now.
Can I ask how much monthly income you're making on dividends, or quarterly, or however you want to break it down? What's coming
Yeah.
in per annum?
Well, it's been one of these routes that's gone up and up and up because I keep investing more and more. And so, when the account balance keeps growing, then the number technically keeps growing, even though it's kind of a tricky measure. So I have like a little spreadsheet that I kind of reference to level that playing field out. Because if you go from, having $5,000 invested to 30,000, well, the number looks bigger, but is it actually that bigger? So I'd say my return, if I remember correctly, on average has been something like 7% annually if you kind of take the monthly averages into account.
Sure.
My phone's not working right now, or I would show you. Look at my little spinny wheel. I got nothing. But I'd say from what I remember, I'm expecting something like 150 to 200 bucks every month at this point. If we average it out, some of these quarterly payers kind of hit when they hit. And so that'll bump up the average, but that's the kind of range that I'm expecting right now.
Sure. And it seems like since you've started dividend investing, you've taken a liking to it. I mean, you talk now, I've been hooked on some of the videos that you've been producing on your channel when it comes to dividend investing. And I've even dove into one of the others, which is the target card, which I want to get to, because
Oh
there's so
yeah.
much more to financial education than just investing. But dividend investing wise, do you plan on stopping, or is this it? Do you wish you started off with dividend investing?
I don't think I regret doing what we did to this point. In a way, I almost feel like I probably wasn't ready before because those opportunities for missteps would have been that much greater. But I think that if somebody's actually paying attention and committed to understanding where those traps are, if you're willing to opt into this, then you could probably make wiser decisions than I made initially. But I don't see any end in sight at this point. I mean, it's really fun. I feel like the returns are good. It's an interesting thing to kind of forecast out and go, what could this mean for us? And I know that the math is out there, and I've watched the videos of the irrelevance of dividends and how, look, you could retire on growth stocks and just pay yourself a salary too. It's not a big deal. There's multiple ways to kind of slice that pie. And for me, that's kind of the fun. Like, I'm not here to argue this way is better or that way is better. Like, if you think dividends are cool and they get your heart racing in the morning, by all means do dividends. If you think they're terrible and you're going to do the growth stocks, like, that's fine, because we're still brothers in this. It's not like we're opponents. And so I think we're more like-minded than we might think whenever we get into the nerd realms of that. But I think it's really fun. I think it's going to be great to keep doing it. And I'm not going to sell all of our growth stocks to go put into this dividend account either. But I don't plan on changing anything anytime soon.
Sure. So one of the videos I actually just watched of yours was rolling over to the Robinhood accounts from your 401ks. And then I also saw some of the Target videos that you had. There's a Target card. I want to ask you, what are some of the steps to actually take before investing to become more financially literate so that by the time you get to be the investor, it's not just the stock market, it's actually having a whole well-rounded background as a, I want to say, personal finance expert?
I think that a lot of people come into investing thinking that they're going to solve an income problem. I had a lot of those comments kind of earlier on and still do every now and then that somebody says, how much, especially on a dividend video, they'll say something like, how much income can I expect if I invest X amount? Because this person clearly has X amount of cash that's like liquid and ready to do something with. They're really wise and disciplined enough to have it and not want to spend it, not want to just blow it on the next thing. They want to better themselves. And so they're thinking, hey, dividends, like I can get paid every month or paid every quarter. That's really cool. But thinking that investing $1,000 or $3,000 into dividend stocks is going to solve your income problem is probably not totally well rooted, because still, let's say you get a crazy return and you get 10% per year, it's not going to amount to very much. What is that, like $9 or $10 a month? It's not going to add up to a whole lot. Even when you get to $100 a month, you got to have a fairly substantial amount invested. And so I think for a lot of us, the first stepping stone is like, let's figure out how to not overspend if we can, wherever we are. If you make $10,000 a year or $100,000 a year, whatever your situation and age is, how can you be in control enough to wrangle your money and tell your money what to do? Whatever system works for you, whatever methodology and mentality works for you, I think you've got to tap into that, because we're all, different in how we think about things and visualize things. So someone might want a really like beautifully tailored app that gives them little charts and talks to them with AI and stuff. Cool. Someone else might want paper. Do that. Like whatever it takes for you to be able to say definitively, I know where my money's going. I think that's probably step number one. And then step number two is like, more income is what we basically need. If you want to invest more, if you want to retire early, if you want to live a nicer lifestyle, all of that comes from a higher income. And so what do you need to do to get a higher income? Could be at your current job, could be switching jobs, could be a certification, whatever that looks like, but doing that with a realistic point of view too, and really investigating what that means, I think is going to help out people a lot, because it's really hard. Like if you're making $30,000 a year and you're living in a metropolitan city, you just don't have money to invest. It's not like you're doing something wrong. It's not like you need to beat yourself up and say, gosh, I'm never going to retire because I only can invest $20 a month. Like maybe I should invest in a different way. It's not about your investing at that point. We've got an income problem. We need a bigger amount of income to leverage toward your goal of, living a snazzy life, buying burritos and race cars, or investing a bunch of money. And so I think a lot of people come into it from that angle of like, maybe I need to make rash decisions in the stock market to compensate for this income problem, when to me, like that seems too risky. I'm not trying to gamble that way personally. I think that if we focus on the income and talk to your boss, talk to your HR person, talk to competitors in the field that you're in, hey, how do you get to the position you're in? What was your journey like to get promoted, to learn that skill, to become so good at sales, whatever it is that they're excellent at? Talk that person's ear off, take them out to coffee and learn from them, so that then you can get on that same kind of trajectory, because income's the solution. But I love trying to recommend, if it is not falling on deaf ears, if I'm anyone worth potentially listening to, take everything with a grain of salt, to solve your kind of self-discipline problem first, then get the income sorted. Because if you do those two things backwards and you were making 30 grand, now you're making 230, well, you're probably going to go buy yourself a Range Rover, and you're probably going to, buy the nice apartment with the full height glass walls, and you're going to have some nice clothes, and like, you're still not going to have any money to invest. You're back to that same position, but with nicer stuff. And there's no way you're going to set yourself up to have a $500,000 dividend portfolio paying you to retire in Thailand or whatever, because you've spent it all. So I think those are kind of the first two steps typically that I think people should sort out yourself, sort out your income, and then let's move into more of the intricacies of, do you have an emergency fund? How do we invest and where? What opportunities do you have there?
I love that notion of lifestyle inflation. It really creeps up, I feel like, on a lot of us, and it can creep up so easily without us really even knowing. Now, something else you mentioned, right, was how important income actually is. I just got an email the other week from somebody who said, how can I live off of dividends? they gave me their numbers. I said, look, income is going to be the most important thing. And it's
Yeah.
not just so easy to jump into the dividend game and live off of dividends. It takes a lot of time, a lot of doubling down on investments. But I feel like you're the perfect person to ask this question to, just based on the content you produce. A lot of YouTubers are out there, or people, big names, faces, saying you can make X amount of money by doing Y. I don't know, t-shirt printing, or watching videos on YouTube, right? And rating them, whatever it may be. These get rich quick schemes. Is this a viable income source for people? Should we be gunning towards these income streams versus actually just working a little bit harder, or perhaps smarter, getting a new job? How do I just cheat the system? Is there such thing as cheating the system?
I mean, the tricky thing is that it's probably more nuanced than we want to believe, because there are times when there's a genuinely new industry or a new technological breakthrough or a real opportunity for someone to on-ramp onto something that, if they do it right, it can seem quicker, easier, faster, more profitable than a more traditional route. The tricky thing, part of that is partially that we don't know what all they went through to get there. So maybe this guy who started the t-shirt printing company and does Amazon FBA and whatever else his drop shipping brand does, maybe he's been selling and hustling and learning about businesses since he was 8, and we just don't know. The immigrant parent factor is always something to factor in there, that by the numbers, an immigrant has a much more higher probability of making it financially than somebody who's been here for 5 generations or something like that. So this kid could have grown up super hungry, seen his parents work their butts off, learned about business when he was young, failed at 10 businesses before he was 20, and then all of a sudden he's 24 driving a Lambo, and we think, well, if he can do that, I can do that. There's a lot of backstory we don't know there. There's a lot of his actual knowledge and experience that we can't necessarily see. So I think that's part of it, and it's kind of tricky there. But the fundamentals of business are what they are. We get compensated in a capitalist society somewhat, not fully, based on the value that we bring. So like, if that guy can generate $1 million in t-shirt sales and make a 30% profit off of it, he's making 300 grand. And he just has bigger numbers that he's working with there because he's adding a big amount of value. It's like the same thing with, let's say, a real estate professional or somebody else who works in sales. If they're selling a large valuation of something and they're doing this complicated, tricky maneuver that requires a bunch of like social nuance and people skills and sales skills and all that stuff, that's hard to do. And so they are fairly compensated for that value they bring. And so I think part of what we have to do is decide, what are we willing to opt into in terms of risk and in terms of like a learning curve. Because for me, I mean, the story now, I grew up and was like, this farming thing is too much risk. We don't have control over our industry. Animals are alive. They hurt themselves or they run around or they get sick or whatever. Like, that's a liability. The weather's a liability. There's all these liabilities and very little control and very little profit. Like, that seems silly. Let me go the opposite direction and say, minimal risk, give me a salary, cut me a check, leave me alone. And then now I've almost bounced back in the opposite direction in the last 6 years to say, no, I actually want more risk. I want to go out on my own on a limb a little bit, take more accountability for what I'm responsible for here, because of that potential upside. The potential of upside starting your own business is essentially limitless, but the downside is also there. There's no safety net for you. And so I think we have to view those opportunities for what they are. Your current job is really nice because it's this very cocooned kind of atmosphere with your paycheck and your benefits and your location and your job responsibilities. Those are all knowns. And the price you pay for that is this very hard capped income ceiling. Kind of sucks, but that's the payoff essentially for having all the risk removed for you. The opposite is like, hey, why don't you go do a 10-mile swim in the ocean? That's a lot of risk. Could be really cool. I don't know, it's kind of a bad example because there's no upside there. You could just drown or not drown. Cool. Be cold or drown. But assuming there's an upside to that, it's like, well, yeah, you can take on this huge amount of risk, go into this totally unknown area, take your life savings or a big chunk of your money and blow it on starting this business. And who knows what's going to happen? You're just walking into the dark. And so I think I've seen some people who are kind of sour on that trade-off and go, well, why can that person make so much money than me? I'm dutifully doing my duty here. And it's like, well, you're an employee at a Target retail store who's very helpful. You're an excellent person at what you're doing, but you're not bringing this exorbitant amount of value to the industry and to target, where if you want the opportunity to do that, you also have to take those downsides with it. And so any of these get rich quick things, or, highly risky, a lot of these things nowadays also rely just on a tremendous amount of traffic or sales. And so it's almost like, well, if you can sell t-shirts, or if you can optimize a website well enough to move a bunch of product, there could even be better opportunities than whatever that get rich quick thing is for you. Because if you have that core skill of siphoning traffic off the internet, selling people, closing people, being persuasive, all of that, you probably should start your own business and do something else. But those are the core skills that are behind a lot of the get rich quick stuff that, again, it's not really shown up front that that's what you need to have. So I think we just have to take the balance for what it is. Do you want a set thing with low risk, or do you want an unknown with high risk and high potential?
Sure. Seemingly, if you pick the riskier routes, you're bound to hit failure at one point or another. But as we always say, I feel like it's one of those fail fast, fail often, fail fast. And eventually, hopefully, you strike gold somewhere. Now, I want to ask you, looking back on your journey thus far, with all of your experiences, what has been one or two larger scale failures that you've encountered that have set you up better for success?
I mean, a couple different ones come to mind. I mean, one of them was the expectation that I had starting a business on my own. Part of that business is making videos online, but I just thought, it's almost like these get rich quick schemes or any other kind of simplified black and white version of interpreting an opportunity, where you go, well, if I check all the boxes, then I should get the outcome, right? Because you're still in that kind of like factory conveyor belt mindset of, we put X, Y, and Z inputs in, and we get these outputs that we want over here at the other end, and then we just do the thing and it's great. And there's just so much more nuance into any new venture than it seems like whenever you're first on the surface of it. And so that's part of this overall lesson that I feel like I've learned from what I feel like has partially been a failure so far to start this online business and make videos, because I'm not where I want to be. My family has taken a huge pay cut to get out of construction to do this now and really give it a fair shot and give it enough time to potentially become a thing. But part of that lesson is just appreciating what it means to actually be in the arena, whatever industry that is, in business, in someone else's life. Like, until you walk a mile in their shoes, you don't know what it's like. Until you're in the arena, you have no clue. It's real easy to be a bystander and make comments and have opinions, but until you're doing the thing, you can't even fathom what it means to do that. And so I think that's a level of respect you give to other people whenever they're doing the thing. And it's a little bit of that cautionary tale to be like, before I jump into a new thing, I've got to realize there's going to be a big chunk of pain, floundering, learning, realizing all the things you didn't know, and getting over that hump. And so just anything new, having that pain, what is that, like the learning curve being so steep in the beginning and then hopefully flattening out over time, that initial steepness is really painful. And I think it puts off most of us. And then another failure I had that led to a lot of growth was, I think, an expectation of, if I come to work every day, do the secure, salary job, but if I show up every day and do what I've basically done my whole life to be accepted and relatively successful, and, do what I've done in high school and college in my previous jobs, then I should be getting all the pats on the back. I should be getting promotions and bonuses, and everyone should be so happy I'm here because I'm showing up and applying myself and I've got a good attitude, and, I'm here. And for me, that was like this big come down moment, because I had this meeting with my bosses at the time. They brought me into their office and they were like, "Hey, let's have this meeting." I'm going, "Oh boy, these are the two biggest guys in the company. This must be good for me." And I'd been there for 5 years, I think, at the point. So I'm like, all right, I've learned a bunch, I've grown a bunch. This is the time when I take the next step up or whatever. And they basically brought me in and they were like, "Brendan, we think that you're doing a pretty good job, but we think you could do a lot better." Okay. And they basically just said that kind of like over and over. It wasn't like, we have pointed feedback, we have a direction for you, we're coaching you, we've got you on a learning plan, we're going to challenge you in this way. Just like, you're pretty lukewarm. You kind of suck. And I was just like super taken aback. I think the expectation level was backwards from what I thought the meeting was going to be, but also just in general, I was like high on my own supply to a degree, thinking, if I show up and apply myself and do what's required of me and be a C+ employee, then everyone should be ecstatic. And it's like, that's not how the market works. That's not how business works. You think about it less about me and more about, what value am I adding to this business? Have I made them millions of dollars this year? No. Then I don't deserve a cut of millions of dollars. I've done pretty well. I've helped out, but I think sometimes we just, for whatever reason, self justify to a degree that's like really unhealthy and think that we are entitled to a lot more than we are. When if we quantify the value that we're bringing to the business, it's not huge, it's not crazy. And the reason that employees exist is to make the business money. It's not like if I make $1 million for the business, I should get $1 million. Then I'm a net loss for them. I'm a break even point. I should be fired. So inherently, we have to add 3, 5, 10 times more value than we're paid. So then, if you want to do that math backwards and go, okay, so I want to make $10,000 more this year, that means I probably need to make them 5, 10, 20 times more than that. I got to make them an extra, I don't know, $100,000, $500,000. Just pick a giant number and say, I've got to give them so much more that they can't help but cut me off a slice of that. That kind of dialogue and that kind of situation that it is what it is when you're an employee also, I think, kind of soured me to that world and pushed me to try and start my own thing. Because if you are on your own, you have all the risk, but you also have the potential of reward. Okay, I made 100% more money for the company, which is me. I get the money. Like it's pretty cut and dry. So
Sure. I want to wrap up with one final question for you, and it's always my favorite question to ask every master of the market here on the show, which is if I were to give you 10,000 virtual dollars here to invest wherever you may like to invest it, ETF, individual stock, I don't know, Bitcoin, perhaps on a farm, where exactly would you invest that 10K and just hold it for the long term, and why?
not in a farm, not in cows or any living beings. We probably don't have enough time to get into crypto, but not in crypto. I would probably, if I had to make it last and be able to sleep at night, which is one of my factors of like, is it a good investment or not? If you're sleeping at night and you're not stressed out about it, then it's probably decent for you. I would probably say just a total stock market index fund. That's what I would do with $10,000 in my lap right now, just because I have faith in the continuation of the U.S. to push for growth, good or bad. But that's what we seem to want to do, and so I'll just take the whole stock market, which inherently is so shifted towards proportionally, the biggest companies. You're basically emphasizing the biggest companies, whether you want to or not, whenever you do that, and so you're buying into the potential of the U.S. stock market growth. But that way, I can go, all right, I've played it fairly safe. We're going to match the market, good or bad. I can sleep at night.
I love the strategy. I love the pick precisely because you actually started off with the same notion, the same point. Just go with an index, go with an ETF over the long span of time. You really can't lose. And that's exactly where you'd put your money if you were given the 10K, which I can always appreciate. It's the level of consistency that you have. Now, investors, again, if you haven't jumped over to Brandon's channel at some point or another, now is the time. A lot of insights can be found on Brandon's channel. And Brandon, I just want to say thank you for joining me again on Masters of the Market. And investors, until next time, we will see you all there.